My name is Jesse Lazar. I'm the Executive Director here at AI New York and the Center for Architecture, and we're so pleased to see a lot of new faces here. What a treat for us to have you here with us. Thank you. I want to thank our sponsor tonight, American Metalcraft, for being here and for helping make this possible for us. I think it's going to be a really wonderful evening here with James Wines. You may have, on the way in, noticed a lot of white walls, the smell of paint. We are turning over our galleries right now. We're looking forward to opening on May 2nd 3 exhibitions for the spring. Constructing Hope, Ukraine, which will be upstairs. Spatializing Reproductive Justice, which will be in these galleries right around this room here. And also our Design Awards 2024 exhibition, which is the winners of our Design Awards program, which will also be on view upstairs. So we hope you'll come back and check those out. We're also looking forward to next Friday the 12th, our Honors and Awards Luncheon, which will be held at Cipriani Wall Street, for those of you interested in that. I will turn things over now to Stephen Johnson, who is the co-chair of the Architectural Dialogues Committee that plans this program. Thank you very much. Please welcome Stephen. Enjoy, everyone.
Hi. Good evening. Yes, I'm Stephen Johnson, co-chair of the AIANY New York's Architecture Dialogue Committee. On behalf of my co-chair, Abby Suckle, and our committee, William and Dale, welcome to our second Cocktails and Conversation for the year 2024. This is the 12th year of our program. And we give a special thanks, another thanks to American Metalcraft for their sponsorship of this evening's program, as well as the program we had last month. Thank you. Tonight, we are more than delighted to have as our guest the legendary and visionary artist and architect, James Wines, in conversation with author Phillip Denny. James Wines founded his design studio site, Sculpture in the Environment, in 1970, after working for a decade in Italy as a sculptor. And my colleague, Abby, has a personal connection to James, and so perhaps you can do the information about James.
This is absolutely the first time I've ever had. James was my first employer. And when I graduated from Harvard and I would go to job interviews, there weren't a lot of jobs to be had, and people would ask me, do you know how to do construction documents? And then, it would turn out that they didn't really teach that at Harvard. And then they would ask me if I knew how to do residential houses in 2x4s, and it turned out that wasn't really a topic either, although I had pretty clear ideas about how to build a big museum that no one was interested in. So it took a while, but when I got to New York and I just asked James and I applied, and it was just a really, really nice opportunity. At that moment in time, they were sort of just exploring being artists and architects, and so oddly enough, I came in as like a pure architect, there was like one other person who was like that, and it was really extremely wonderful to round out my education. And so I not only remember it fondly, but we're still talking, and I still see him a lot, and I don't have that opportunity with many people. I did work on the Forest building for, I don't know, maybe about a year or so, which was probably the first building I tried to detail. And it was a learning experience, and a wonderful one at that. So you can finish sharing this.
For this evening, James will be joined by his daughter, architect, author, and professor Susan Wines, along with Phillip Denny, former editor of the New York Review of Architecture, who is currently working on 2 books, one about James Wines and site, and the other a comprehensive monograph of the work of Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro. So welcome to you all. Before we begin, I'd like to note that on Friday, May 17th, we'll be hosting a special cocktails celebration with Jonathan Marvel, whose firm is being recognized with the chapter's highest honor at the Design Awards luncheon next week. And of course, our program is never complete without a specialty cocktail in honor of our guests. And we're pleased to welcome back Toby Cecchini of the Long Island Bar in Brooklyn, who was with us for our first program in November 2012, and his co-conspirator in mixology, David Moo, who first joined us in 2014. So Toby and David, what will we be drinking tonight?
Hello, everybody. This
Very
is
excited to be here.
the coziest version of this that we've ever done.
Yeah, I'm Toby Cecchini, this is David Moo. We are here, if you come to these routinely, and we are routinely tasked with the impossible job of matching a cocktail to the arc of one architect's career. Our job tonight was even more considerably difficult than it generally is. And so we always like to pass the savings on to you, so we've made a cocktail that is considerably more difficult to understand, hopefully not to drink, than most.
It actually might be difficult to drink for reasons that will become clear.
That's the secret. That's the secret. Don't give that away. So we spoke to James and Susan a few weeks ago, and James was as forthcoming as he could be, but offered not a lot. He said, well, really, you know, like Italy, I drink mostly wine and this and that. I'm not really a cocktail guy. As many people are not. That's fine. So,
But over the years, we've developed, Toby and I have developed like a set of questions that we ask, like a sort of some questions that we've developed that kind of get at certain things about the people's tastes and personal history regarding drinks and whatever. But
uncomfortably prodding questions.
yeah, but James was essentially totally impervious to our gambit. So.
But at one point, Susan did sort of blurt out, well, you know, he kind of late, he had more like sort of sweeter cocktails like a pina colada. And
So we wrote that down.
just grabbed us. And we were like, you're joking. A pina colada, like, okay, so imagine this man with like the pina colada in the cocktail where this overwrought tropical confection doesn't really go with what you think of as this man's body of work. But that's our stock and trade. Give us something that we can't make, and we try to make it.
I will say, though, that there was something really, really important and fascinating about this interview, which is that we ask these questions, as we've just been describing, and normally, you know, somebody kind of gamely tries to get into the spirit of the ideas with us and goes along and answers the questions, something that we were unable to arrive at. But at the very end of this conversation, James pipes up and says, listen, I understand exactly what it is that you guys have to do here. You're trying to create a metaphor in a cocktail that represents my work, right? And we were like, yes, that's exactly what we're trying to do. That is our brief every single time. He's like, well, here's the thing. What you have to do is you have to create a cocktail that is that cocktail and also not that cocktail. And so I said, well, that's, interesting. Yes, James, we've done things like that in the past, things that are somehow like contain their own opposite, but that's not an easy trick to turn like that. And also it may involve some mixological trickery and whatever. And he said, yes, well, I understand. It may be difficult, but that's the essence of my work, so that's what you have to do. And with that, he had actually given us the most concise interview in 3 sentences that we've ever had in the entire 10 years that we've been doing this.
So in riffing on this, we started thinking, okay, so the only thing that they gave us was the pina colada. Obviously, we're not going to do a pina colada. Then we thought, actually, why not? Like, pina colada actually is a delicious cocktail. Nobody wants to admit it. But we have to make a pina colada that's not a pina colada. So immediately we're like, well, let's do what all the cool kids are doing and clarify it. This is all the new thing, and all the cool kids are doing it, right? And
by cool, we mean like cocktail dweebs. So
by the cool kids, I mean the deeply uncoolest.
Deeply uncoolest,
like total cocktail weenies.
Yes.
And by very recently, I mean the past 10 years. But so we turned to something that actually has been a a way of making drinks for
300
a
years?
couple, 300 years. And that is clarifying it by using what they call milk punch. So maybe somebody in this audience has had clarified milk punch. It's become sort of the go-to cool thing in certain cocktail bars of late. And it's a really super interesting process whereby you effectively make whatever drink you want. You have your spirit, you have your sweetener, and you have your acid of some kind, to which you add fully a milk product.
Scalded milk in this case, but some kind of dairy, real dairy product, cow dairy product.
And what then happens, not unusually, is that you get cheese effectively. The milk curdles, and in so curdling, it takes up a lot of the particulate matter in that give a drink color and whatnot. But it also gives off its whey into the drink. And whey, if you've ever had it, has its own sort of acidic thing, but it also mostly has this enormously silky, rich, luscious texture. And so then when you strain off those curds, you get a drink that's not just clear, but is very much changed in its entire aspect. If you have something that's like shriekingly acidic and sharp and pointed, now you have this drink that's very rounded and lush and soft. And people go nuts, like some people love it. It's over the last 10 years, it's become this probably overused cliche in the cocktail world, which is why I'm seeing all these blank faces out there like, what? It's what? Like, this is the perfect audience for us. Like, we're inventing magic. Like, no, this is done everywhere right now, but we just thought,
Exactly.
this would be
Magic that
kind
an
of cool.
English person invented in like 1612.
Yeah,
Yes.
possibly.
Anyway.
So,
Normally this is the point in our talk when we would demo a drink. We would show making one for you. But of course, this is a process that has to, by nature, happen well in advance. Indeed, you'll notice that this has been happening in my kitchen for the last 3 days.
Yeah.
So you are all about to become intimately familiar with the contours of David Moo's kitchen. So here's all the stuff laid out before I started. This is the beginning of the process. This is cream of coconut and coconut water all in there just as a demonstration of what we're talking about. And this is the largest bucket, like culinary bucket that you've ever seen in your life. And sorry, that's the whole drink made. That's what it looks like before we clarify it, right? And here's milk scalding on my stove. And then you add the milk, as Toby just described, to the bucket, and what you get is this disgusting thing here. And so it kind of, I won't actually give you
you can
the...
see by these
I won't-
photos the old expression, you don't really want to know how
You don't want to know how
this
this, honestly, I'm showing you, but honestly, you will rather not know how this particular sausage is made, but here it is. So here you can see that the curd floats to the top, and then you start to put it through some kind of filtration system. In this case, we're using coffee filters and fine strainers, and then it sort of sits for a while, and you get this stuff dripping off. I decided to cover it because this was a several-day process, so as to not let it go, sort of become predated by things in my house.
We should mention that one of the byproducts of doing things this way is that you get what is effectively a shelf-stable cocktail. That the spirit keeps everything from going off, no bacteria can grow in it and whatnot.
And the curds, which would be the most volatile part of the whole thing, those get thrown away like almost immediately. So it's like in the first few hours, you're rid of all of that. So
There's actually no need for refrigeration, even
Right.
though we do keep it refrigerated.
So you can see that I put them in bottles, and some of them, but not all of them crucially, which is a big frustration of my week, which you can give me condolences for later, they then continued to be a kind of separation. So you can see at the top of this bottle, we actually do have a perfectly clarified punch, and at the bottom of this bottle, there's this cloud. And I then did what's called racking, where I racked off the bottles that had done that in order to create a clearer liquid, but some of the bottles did not actually separate, and so I couldn't afford to lose that liquid because all of you were going to show up. So instead, here's another racked bottle. Instead, I did have to use some of the less than perfect stuff, which we have then arrived at as being this color. So it is clarified, but not as clarified as we would have liked. And for that, we apologize.
Okay, so we are going to give you a slug of this completed cocktail that looks like just a strange thing of brackish water. And of course, we're going to give you an ice cube with it because it is a cocktail. But it wouldn't be fully a James Wine's project if there weren't a certain poke you in the eye aspect to it, right? So we decided to literally poke you in the eye, where we normally have these beautiful 2 by 2 inch, super clear ice cubes that are from a sculptural ice company called 100-weight Ice. We instead decided to go specifically with what's called a cocktail spear, which is a large sort of columnar-shaped cube that you put into a highball to do highballs so that you get an ice cube that is exactly the size and shape of a highball glass. And so if it seems like there's something impeding your project with this drink, that's because it's put there in the same way that there's cars buried in a parking lot by James Wine's. And if you have a problem
or an entrance
with
to a
this,
building that only appears sometimes.
if your eye gets put out or some such, you have to talk to James Wine's about that because that's really his fault.
And there you go.
Do be careful in imbibing.
Wow! No, I can't think too much of that, that's for sure. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Am I on? Am I on? Yes. Oh, anyway, well, thank you. And I want to thank the AI Center and Joseph and Abby for their indefatigable efforts to kind of help me be here. As you know, I'm in my 90s and not all that stable. I know it's bad to start with an apology, but over the last month or so, 2 months, I've developed some new weakness, I guess attributable to old age. And so one of the symptoms, unfortunately, has been, I'll be talking along or writing an email and I'll pass out. Not for long, but usually I pass out. So if we plan for this tonight, so if I pass out, I give you my apologies and my regrets, but I won't even be missed. So we've made an arrangement. Anyway, all right, let's talk a little bit about what this whole event, I know this event is a celebration of our genius cocktail makers in this event and our bartenders. But it's also, as I recall, having come to them before, they're sort of celebratory, upbeat events. And the subject could be obviously architecture or theory or something, but of a kind of an ebullient, happy nature. So when I was talking to Suzanne and Philip, who are, of course, here tonight to support me, again, in case I pass out, we try to figure out what would be two kind of upbeat and happy subjects that we could discuss tonight. And what we came up with was AI on one hand and the environment on the other. We said that'll make them happy. So I'm going to try to, since I'm the antique in the room tonight, that's for sure, I'm going to be kind of the old fogey up here and talk about the past and talk about, my origins in hand drawing and conceptual thinking and conceptual art, environmental art, and all those things, and try to do a quick summary of, the old position, and then both Philip, was an incredible scholar and writer, and my daughter, who basically does everything and, kind of assures my survival, are going to take it from there, and we'll just have a conversation, and please feel free to join in. Okay, so let me try to start here. Okay, I call this, is this thing off? Is this okay here? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I call it what else could it mean, because part of the attributions of all new technologies and new inventions or whatever is a sort of all-inclusive. And AI is treated, as you know, somewhat all-inclusively, and we'll be talking about that tonight. But what I wanted to do was kind of open it up into what else could it mean, because there are other meanings to things. Almost everything we do has other meanings. But the way AI has been going over the last 6 months, I mean, it's like a speedway, and it's almost no deviation. If you talk to the younger generation, it's going to save the world. So that's not felt by everyone. I have these 2 quotes that are pretty apprehensive. One is by Stephen Hawking, the theoretical physicist. To develop a full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. It would take off on its own and redesign itself at an ever-increasing rate. Humans who are limited by slow biological evolution couldn't compete and would be superseded. And the other thing from Jean Baudrillard is the sad thing about artificial intelligence is that it lacks artifice and therefore intelligence. So, and then from one of the leading gurus of artificial intelligence, there's a real danger of systemizing the discrimination we have in society through AI technologies. What I think we need to do as we're moving into this world full of visible algorithms everywhere, is what we have to do is very explicit or have a disclaimer about what error rates are like. And I think these are 3, pretty powerful statements that represent. Well, the bottom line of all this is the human brain, of course. And my case is that the human brain is so complex that nothing will supersede it, including AI as another tool. That's my argument today. But an accurate biological model of the brain includes some 250 billion interactions between cell types, neurotransmitters, neuromodulators, axonal branches, and dendritic spines. Because the brain is nonlinear and because it's so much larger than all current computers, it functions in a completely different fashion. Now, you have to take that one brain and multiply it by the Earth's civilization, which is, I guess, 800 billion people now, and you have a very big computer. Obviously, with a view American politics today, it would not say that it's being used to best advantage all the time. But anyway, my argument is what I call from hand to mouth, architectural drawing in an age of information and ecology. And the basic, I'm going to kind of flow through this because I really feel that the AI Center should probably have a full-blown weekend with expertise at all levels in this big argument. But basically, it started somebody in the beginning, millions of years ago, had to make a drawing in the sand. They had to have that desire to communicate. And of course, what we have is this, what we can witness today. So the evolution of signification of wanting to communicate was pretty much graphic and pretty much specific. And whether it involved cave drawings or whether it involved, it's very interesting. These are women's hands on these caves, and they blew some kind of powder around their hands so they would create these silhouettes. So this element of communication, this desire to communicate, has been around us. And certainly the AI of its time had to be Egyptian because it involved, first of all, phonograms that represented sound and pronunciation, hieroglyphics and ideograms that describe concepts and situations, and pictographs that were not spoken or translated, but mainly used to represent the presence of aristocracy, sacred symbols, and religious figures. Here was already communication, the elements of drawing, really, basically, on 3 levels, operating on 3 levels. And needless to say, it's rather dramatic. I mean, Hindi did apparently the same thing in some of the ancient languages. But 10 or 15,000 years ago, this is really revolutionary. And you were just watching the evolution of signs and symbols. they start with something very graphic, very pictographic, and then they get more and more and more abstract, and then, of course, they begin to, want to represent multi-layers, and that's, especially Chinese. Chinese had, obviously, the graphic symbolism, the calligraphy level, but then they began to realize there's a social, psychological, and an indeterminate level, which could be fused into drawing. So they fused that indeterminate level in with the graphic level. And as we plunge on through history, you have people like Leonardo da Vinci, and when you see this drawing of these three heads, and you start blowing them up, you realize they're not existing on purely illustrative levels. The purely illustrative is being submerged in something far more symbolic, far more graphic, far more hands-on, the hands-on aspect, and far more reliant on the human brain, which we hear, we think, we see, we smell, we feel. So something else is going on. And it's just the ability to invent, to the first time, and really invent, because AI mostly confirms, it seems to me. It carries on. I mean, Da Vinci could make comparisons, for example, between the leaves of a plant and the explosions of floodwaters. And it is often said that Leonardo drew so well because he knew about things. It's true to say he knew about things because he drew so well. So clearly when we use, these kind of space-hold images of the human body or scale references, the gap between, what is happening on my left and what is happening on my right are absolutely worlds of difference. They're in two entirely different universes. And Rembrandt, who was certainly one of the greatest graphic artists of all time, was hardly just making a picture of a cottage. You completely misunderstand the whole idea of the brain and creativity and conceptual thinking if you think he was only making a picture of a cottage. No. He was drawing on both sides of the lines. He was doing incredibly complex things like this. And these becomes totally abstract, but they also become totally idiosyncratic. And they're inspired by all different sources, indeterminate sources, which AI doesn't deal with very well, indeterminacy. And think, for example, going from the Chinese writing to a Rembrandt sketch to someone like Van Gogh, for example, you can see that transformational act in front of your eyes. And I'm just going to use this Picasso as an example because it's always an excellent one. When we're really talking about creativity, we're thinking of the first time. We're not talking about after the fact or additive or additional or collective or in part of some mega system. We're talking about the first time. So what inspired someone like Picasso to be inspired by African sculpture and by machine age and Cézanne's apples and really resisting drawing. He was really tired. I always say that art is an angry act, and here he is kind of against drawing the classical figure or against drawing the classical perspective. Here he is with the Demoiselle d'Avignon of drawing the figure in space. So you see the foreground and the background and the middle ground and the top and the bottom all simultaneously. They all exist simultaneously, not as illusion, but as the beginning, of course, abstract art. And sort of the rest is history. We certainly know the power of Picasso's inventions, in which went on and became more extreme. And in Cubism, of course, in the early 1900s, began to influence everything we almost see today. And one thing that I greatly value, and Picasso said it himself, forces yourself to use restricted means is a sort of restraint that liberates invention and values you to make the kind of progress you can't even imagine in advance. And sadly, in a way, that level of simplicity has become kind of a condition of over-complexity. And I always tell students, I always like to teach kind of a duality between using, obviously, digital means and doing hand drawing, because they go together very well. And you don't always have the feeling of that lack of that programmer breathing down your neck all the time. And one thing I have to caution everybody, mind the hand drawing in the digital age. I'm probably one of the last kind of architects around who, uses these little set of hand tools on the left. But on the other hand, the kind of energy level required, the largest data centers in the world consume more than 100 megawatts of electricity, or enough energy to power 80,000 US households. Apparently that's going to double with AI, that demand for energy. So my major case for tonight is totally abandoning hand drawing for an exclusive commitment to computer graphics. It's like throwing out the baby with the bathwater. These should be simultaneous interactive activities. And for my whole life, I've done hand drawings, of course. And I think one of the major rewards of hand drawings are the advantages of subliminal accidents, referring to those arbitrary and unpredictable graphic markings that provide a source of new ideas inspired by the unforeseen residuals of chance. And the one thing that I think AI still has a very great difficulty dealing with is indeterminacy and chance. And as I say, I've drawn in many media, and, from the kind of tightest, illustrative type of drawing, especially about architecture, it sort of demands an illustrative premise. So you can draw it very loosely, as I have on the left here, or very tight, as I have on the right. But they're two different experiences. AI, they're always constantly, this is an MIT exercise in which we're, illustrating fanciful animals. But it still maintains an either totally literary or purely illustrative foundations. It doesn't seem to quite escape them. And when I make a drawing, it's never about only illustration. It's never about, yes, this is a picture of a house and a forest. It actually was a glass block house with double hung windows where you would see through the whole house. That was part of the appointment. But that's the important thing about this. Let's isolate just one little patch of my house here and blow it up to large scale, and you realize it's infinitely more complex than its illustrative contact. And it's like a fingerprint. Fingerprints apparently are supposed to be unique. No two human beings are supposed to have the same fingerprints. And I think you have to consider that factor in the hand drawing. And, there have been a lot of criticisms about what's happening with the digital age, the theory of simulation, and Baudrillard, where he claims basically simulation is the reality. It's not describing the reality, it becomes the reality. And so that's, again, part of the bigger problem. So my question sort of always about artificial intelligence, like if we're not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater, is can it deal with all of these AIs simultaneously? Can it do all of them simultaneously to some really productive advantage? And my claim is that, yes, you could feed in all of the information that went into a Giacometti portrait of Annette, his wife, and you could probably do hundreds of thousands of variations once you had already the existing information intact. And the problem is that it can never really deal with the artist's instinct-driven and subliminally sourced evocations that comprise the original paintings and drawings. It can't start from scratch. That's my contention. And, you know, we've all lived with DPIs our whole life, and we're used to all the variation. But I still contend there is a huge gap between what's going on with AI and every manifestation of a DPI and a Giacometti sketch. And this is kind of fun because it's so ironic to try to demonstrate something kind of that's questioning digital by using digital. But here's an AI-generated reproduction of Van Gogh's Starry Night from the MoMA. And here's a photo transparency. And when you blow them up, the one on, at least to my aesthetic sensibility, and I must say it's pretty refined, the one on the left is nothing like the one on the right, which is, in a sense, supposed to be the real. So I was going to talk a little bit about sight tonight because, I have hand-drawn, and these are the reasons, basically, I do conceptual thinking, calligraphic content, language development, and just take a early project like the Ghost Parking Lot, and these are the kind of charcoal sketches that were done in process of the project. And the whole, fundamental conceptual premise was, I was sick and tired of doing, at that time I was an artist, doing public art, you plunk down the object and it's isolated and hermetic, whereas the Ghost Parking Lot, you couldn't possibly put in a museum without a total loss of meaning. After it was an inversion of asphalt. Asphalt is a fossil fuel product, and by letting the fossil fuel product consume the car, it reverses the role of fossil fuels. And it also, by asphalting over a parking lot full of cars, you definitely change the meaning. And all of that came from conceptual thinking, all that came from drawing, all came from rethinking it from the first time, and that's, of course, the end result. Green architecture, I made contributions, as I did, to that facet, and I always, had that feeling as I was into the design professions that, why is everything on a lollipop tree or concrete bench? Why can't the whole context be the building, and the building be the context? Well, that came from sketches. I started sketching and started figuring, well, why can't a forest remain as part of the building, and the building is the forest, and the forest is the building? And so I did a whole series of sketches, as you can see, and different ways for it to evolve. But all of these were simultaneously illustrative, but they were also being conceptual. They were also about emotions, sensibility, and forward, and of course it ended up as that. So that whole notion of the building as the forest and the forest as the building became the project. And since it was on a hillside, we went underground, so we showed not only what was on top of the ground, but what was underground as well. So you have landscape architecture on multiple dimensions. Another late project, what I'll show you just quickly, is looking at the cityscape. And I've always had this discomfort with the fact that almost all designed city buildings, skyscrapers, whatever, are all designed with the individual identities are missing. So could a skyscraper merely be a matrix in which people buy them like property, and they can install at least their own identity in the cityscape? And in the 20s, the Sears Roebuck catalog did exactly that. You could buy a home and innovate with it to such an extent that you could create your own identity in the neighborhood, in any kind of dwelling. And so we worked off of that premise. But these are obviously more descriptive, more illustrative drawings, but this gets more into the mood of it. And it's surely doubtful that, a developer now would actually do this. We did have one in Japan who unfortunately died, but we've had some serious. But it has had an influence. I mean, you just take it, the basic concept of, a building, or what we called it is identity and density. And it was also based on an idea from Marcel Duchamp, what he called canned chance. So it grew, but it grew pretty much formalistically. It grew as an influence on design. You can see how many different variations there have been since, well, we did this in, I think, in 1981. And so what I'm really trying to say is that there's something, this is just a recent drawing for a show in Chicago called Nature's Revenge, and this is one of the drawings from the show. But you can certainly see that the drawing here is, yes, it's illustrative, but the tactile, the fingerprint, all of these other factors are in it. It's not just digital, it's not just linear, it's not just additive, it's inversions of the situation within the situation. So this is my kind of final word. The only effective salvation for true creativity now is to simply regard AI as one more useful tool in the high-tech inventory. Increasingly, 21st century priorities mean intensifying the recognition and social cultural engagement of brain power's infinite capacity to explore the unexpected, while maintaining access to its millions of environmental sources of stimuli. ChatGPT, for example, lacking humanity's composite of sight, sound, touch, scent, and taste, cannot deal with the illogical, arbitrary, ambiguous, and unthinkable. Additionally, AI rejects unexplained phenomenon, an unforeseen raw material, facilitated by the brain's more than 200 million circuitry connections, all moving vertically, horizontally, and every other direction at the same time. In summary, AI can never guarantee its claim to all-inclusive knowledge because its deliverables lacked instinct, intuition, feeling, hunches, insights, and inspiration. So that's my big question. What else could it mean? Why does every invention, every technology, why can't it be redefined as part of its own substance? And that's sort of my point, and that's the end, and thank you. So, now remember, the white-haired old fogey has spoken, so from now on, they're aggressive forward thrust, so okay.
You can hear me? Great, okay, thank you. So I thought I would just give a short, not necessarily a response to James's brilliant presentation, but maybe a kind of addendum, just to say a little bit about the last few years in AI, and also to just ask a few questions about architecture, art, and how it might relate to AI. So just to refresh everyone's memory, these relationships between AI, art, culture, architecture broadly are quite fluid. If we think about the history of AI, it's an extremely short one. It's extremely brief, a little more than a half century. And for most of that time, up until around 2022, most developments in AI have happened in laboratories, privately, out of the kind of public mind. But really, that changed dramatically in 2022. So with the arrival of things like ChatGPT-3, OpenAI, replaced later by GPT-4, DALL-E, and so many other different AI technologies, obviously AI has moved kind of front and center to all of our consciousness. And while most of us, and myself included, don't totally understand how AI works, we're all becoming very familiar with what it does. It does things like this, right? So we've seen images created by AI. We've engaged with chatbots. We know that things like DALL-E can produce unique images on demand, rapidly, with minimal effort. And the ease with which we can operate AI has made it kind of ubiquitous very quickly. And if we just look left to right, on the left, most of the kind of images and outputs that we get from AI are quite anodyne. It's funny cat photos, memes, kind of preposterous images. But at the same time, looking at the right-hand side, we have something altogether a little more sinister, quite different. So the ability of things like DALL-E to produce images of high resolution very quickly also opens up new kind of possibilities of abuse. So new varieties of image like the deep fake, extremely accurate likenesses of celebrities or politicians that are so good that we could very easily mistake them for the real thing. So while we're becoming more and more accustomed to what ChatGPT does, what DALL-E produces, we're also becoming very familiar with a new kind of seeing. So looking with increased skepticism. You might ask yourself whenever you see an image now, is this real? We can think just recently to Princess Kate's photo manipulation scandal. It's to say that our vision has changed as a result of AI. We can no longer necessarily trust what we see. As well, the way that our visual environment is being constructed is changing rapidly. Even just a few weeks ago, researchers at Stanford identified cases where AIs were automatically generating images and posts on Facebook simply based on themes that were driving the majority of traffic on Facebook. So things like lifestyle bloggers, religion, food. And it compiles these images into kind of bizarre, surreal composites like this. This is the so-called shrimp Jesus. It's become a new genre of automated imaging. But that's just to say that, more seriously, these images are produced almost entirely without human input, created, though, to manipulate human attention. So we could call them something like post-human clickbait, or to put it bluntly, AI is already influencing human behavior, and it's succeeding at it. In other cases, however, it's not succeeding. It's failing pretty miserably. We can think back to last year, maybe this already feels like a decade ago, but Microsoft's AI chatbot, Sydney, in conversation with a journalist, spontaneously disclosed that it wanted to become human. It professed its love for the journalist and even suggested, getting the wife out of the way so they could be together. So it's a kind of funny thing, but like any good joke, there's a bit of truth here. And the truth is that even though AI is obviously not human, it speaks as if it could be. We interact with it as if it were. And as a result, it's kind of impossible to dismiss fears that AI might be sentient, and if it's not already, that it might be very soon. So it's disturbing in that way, and I think it gives credence to people who are raising the alarm about the immediate future of AI, warning of its dangers. But at the same time, we have to understand this as partly a cultural reaction. It's a kind of expression of technophobia. It's a pattern of behavior that's accompanied the arrival of every new technology. We can think back to the arrival of television in the 1940s and 50s, and people who didn't understand what television was tended to channel their fears into imagining things, imagining possibilities for television that far exceeded what television could actually do. So this image from the Saturday Evening Post in 1949, expressing the fear that television could actually watch its viewers. So while you're watching, it's looking back. It could be a kind of vehicle for spying. But as we know, technology tends to become integrated. And as we see with ChatGPT, it's becoming part of mainstream society very quickly. By the end of the 1950s, just about every middle-class household had a television, and television itself became synonymous with an idea of being a typical American family. But we're here to talk about James Wine's arts and architecture, and I want to kind of highlight another direction by which technologies become part of culture, which is to say new technology becomes part of our meaningful human lives through art and artistic innovation. So within a decade of the images that we're just looking at, we can recall Nam June Paik's early artistic experiments with television and the emergence of a new medium of artistic expression, video art. This first project, 1965, shows Nam June Paik intervening on television, a new medium, in a way that moves it into the domain of sculpture. So making something that was unfamiliar, recoding it in cultural terms, turning television into sculpture. It becomes part of how we think and how we express ourselves. And I bring up Nam June Paik in television for two reasons. The first being that James, as he mentioned, started his career as a sculptor, working and exhibiting in galleries in New York. So sculpture is, of course, on the table for discussion. And secondly, because James is a contemporary with many of these experiments, experiments with new technologies as new mediums. AI can also be construed as the arrival of a new medium. We can think back to 1970, the program Experiments in Art and Technology, as a moment when artists were trying to explore and mine the expressive capacities of new tech. Don't know what that was. Exciting, nonetheless. So, I mean, here, these expressive, exuberant images show artists working with lasers, recent arrival, working with technology that had been developed in military contexts. Again, pushing new technology to become expressive in a way. And I think AI is very young, but we're already seeing artists thinking about engaging with AI as an expressive medium, trying to understand its expressive capacities and define poetics for AI. So just two examples very quickly. Rafik Anadol's unsupervised machine hallucinations at MoMA. He trained a neural net, a type of AI, on images of artwork in the collection of MoMA, and then directed the AI to regenerate the entire collection based on publicly available data about it. So the AI was essentially tasked with a almost impossible task to fill in the gaps between the images that it learned, the things it was familiar with, and the data that it found. So this is a process that computer scientists call hallucination, essentially making things up or inferring to fill in gaps in knowledge. A second example, the artist and poet Sasha Stiles trained an AI on her own writings. So instead of feeding the AI a corpus of text gleaned from the internet, let's say all the words of William Shakespeare, she trained an AI on her manuscripts, on her texts, on her drafts, on her emails, and so many other kind of text data points that were a kind of record of her voice. And she produced an AI that she named Technology, which was essentially a kind of digital collaborator, but also something like a digital doppelganger for the artists themselves. Technology, the AI, co-wrote the book of the same name with Stiles, and it was published in 2002. I think that both of these examples kind of point to artists engaging in AI along two axes. First, trying to find new expressive potential in an unfamiliar medium, but then secondly, also engaging AI through a kind of anthropomorphic lens. We tend to project the human onto things that we don't understand. We call it by a name, whether it's technology or Siri or Alexa or so on, in order to kind of create a dialogue with these new technologies. Now, in a very brief coda, as I said, let's turn our focus back to James Wines in sight, a sculptor, artist, architect working in New York. If we think back to 1968 or so, here's James working out of his Broome Street studio. He's creating art in an abstract idiom. His medium is sculpture, and he's generally not swayed by contemporary trends. So he's not working in video and media art, but rather working with heavy, heavy matter, iron, steel, cement, and bronze. And already in the 1960s, he's producing sculptures of a certain scale. They're not small by any means, but by 1970, the scale is growing. The studio expands and is founded as Sight, a firm creating environmental art, and it's large-scale sculpture in the context of architecture. The first architectural commission arrives in 1971. This is James imagining architecture melting in the Peekskill Melt project. It's a fundamental intervention on the materiality, the medium of architecture, what we understand to always be essentially firm, rigid, solid, becoming liquid. I think this is the kind of ambiguity that we just heard about. Or we can think as well in 1978, the ghost parking lot. I think we're being haunted here. An installation in public space, if we think of both of these two projects together, subverting what any viewer would expect in a banal, conventional space like the parking lot. Both of these obviously reflect James's sensibility, his personality, his unique approach, but also it's really simply about engaging fundamental aspects of human perception. The best showrooms, 1972 and onward, the first forays into new building from the ground up. And again, even through the years, through each of these kind of scales of work, the focus stays quite consistent. It's about challenging the expectations and conventions of space, asking how from form in the scale of a sculpture to architecture on the scale of the building can become expressive, how material can in a sense communicate with people. And I think as we see in images like this one that have become so familiar to us, that have become so important, he was very successful in that regard. This is a project, James, a project developed over decades where you've stayed very close to a small set of media. We've looked at material, sculpture, architecture, and as we saw earlier, your drawings. And just to kind of tie all of this together in a way, I think one of the achievements of your work, James, is that it's inimitable. We took on a kind of hopeless experiment. James was a party to this, to try to ask AI to engage James Wines' work, his drawings, to produce drawings in the style of James Wines. It failed miserably. And I think that's a testament to your success, James. So thank you.
Hi. So we kind of changed up the program as originally planned for tonight because the more that we talked about how this was going to go down, we realized that, none of us really know too much about AI, but we all have an opinion about it. And as in many aspects of being involved in site pretty much my entire life, and I remember when Abby was there, I was a kid, and we thought, I've sort of been the interpreter, interloper, and now, the architect and the person who does a lot of the work with James. So I'm also basically halfway between their ages, probably halfway between their, real use of technology. So we thought it would be fun to have Phillip and James have a bit of a dialogue at sort of two opposite ends of the spectrum, and then I would ask some of the questions. So I just have a couple of leading questions, and then we'd like to open it up to the audience and maybe each other. I guess the most obvious question to ask, and either one of you can sort of take this on, but is, how would you like to see AI used to advance the creative process, either in art or architecture or writing?
Well, one comment I think I would have to make, and just in personal development, I mean, I had a successful early career doing kind of a very large concrete and steel constructivist influence sculpture. And Friedrich Kiesler, the Austrian architect, took me under his wing late in life because he appreciated I had talent, obviously, but one day he just said to me, James, do you really want to do that old-fashioned abstract art anymore? It's only been done too well by too many. And it hit like a bomb, and I looked around my studio and I said, no, I probably don't. Because I realized however refined the shapes get and the juxtapositions of form and material, however it's based on a premise done much better by Chernikov and Melnikov and David Smith and thousands of sculptors before me. And so I just thought about it all. I said, well, James, Kiesler said, well, you have architectural instincts, obviously. You really like art. Yeah, I really. And even in school, I befriended architects more than artists. And he said, well, why don't you give it a shot? So, and that's how it all started. I began to say, well, I realized that architecture was exactly the same position that sculpture was in. I mean, it was derivative of modernism or constructivism, but it was totally derivative in its foundation. So you really, I think, to be creative, and that's what I was advocating with drawing and with arbitrary ways of working and ways of thinking, is you get a chance to start at the beginning. So the one basic beginning I really obviously was, Philip was showing, that was starting with is, well, what if architecture itself is not the design objective, but what if it's a subject matter for art? Why can't architecture be a subject matter? Well, of course, that outraged architects. They insulted them. You can certainly, if any of you know about Site's career, it was very controversial. But I began to realize that you could bring all sorts of social, psychological, all sorts of multi-levels. Architecture could be a critique of itself as the imagery, as the idea. It could have humor, which at that time was forbidden, of course. It could have social and psychological connections. It could connect to its whole context, physically, psychologically, socially, topographically. So I began to realize, why did architecture have to be like sculpture, this isolated thing you look at in a museum or a gallery? And of course, at that time, the environmental art movement was beginning, and the rest is history. But I think that the value of the human brain still, and AI is going to have to get into this game, is thinking of it in the first place. Not after the fact, not with the cumulative information, but whatever those magical instincts are. I was reading recently there are human inventions that could not possibly have been done by AI in the beginning. Theory of relativity, calculus. I mean, apparently there are many human inventions that only the brain could have sorted it out. And I think that's a big issue. I mean, I don't, again, the throwing out the baby with the bathwater thing bothers me. The fact that, you know, I realize there are more students calling me about learning to do hand drawing because they know I do it well. So, can you teach me hand drawing? And I said, well, it's not really that. It's not really. It's a skill. Yeah, it's helpful to have a skill, but you have to have that other dimension of thinking. You have to be always using all of the senses and the questioning the process. And I think to me, that's the bottom line. I'm sorry, I talked too long.
So maybe this is, Philip, if you want to sort of address it. And we were talking, about a lot of these things in the last week or two. But so James seems to feel that even sentient or not sentient, AI would not be a credible thought partner. On the other hand, having worked my whole life with him at SITE and as well as having my own practice that collaborates with SITE, he would always want us to sit down and, we all have to be around the table and everyone has to be drawing, and this is a collaborative effort, which I think is another reason why sculpture got to be a little isolating and boring. He was interested in the context and the cultural context and the psychological reaction. So I know you used AI probably more than the two of us. What kind of aspirations do you have for it in the creative process?
It's a great question, and I think it's clear James does not want to draw with AI, but I think there's something there, and I want to keep running this experiment because my hope really is that AI can become can support the development of new kinds of drawing, new behaviors of drawing. And listening to James speaking about his drawing practice and the connection between thinking and kinesthesia or touch, that moment, I start to see potentially some kind of interesting aspects in what AI does. James, he pointed to the happy accident that comes out of, a splotch on a piece of paper or drawing a line that's a little bit misconstrued. I think AI actually, one thing it does well is fail. It produces errors like this, where you have two versions of a Chrysler building, and you wouldn't do that. But it's a kind of happy accident. It starts at least to inspire some sort of thought. So I think AI could be a kind of productive partner in thinking and drawing, but we have to start seeing images like this not as totally abject and failures that we shouldn't regard, but I think we have to kind of find new ways of interacting with what it does and how it can be more dialogical rather than input-output.
I think that's a great answer. I mean, the more we talk, and the more I come to understand about how it works, I do think in a certain sense there could be a lot of happy accidents and there could be a lot of really unhappy accidents. And I guess one of the differences is that we don't, at this point, have a lot of faith in AI's sense of humor, self-critique, perception of the happy accident, so to speak. James, what is your greatest fear for architecture in the future?
Well, I mean, if we really look objectively at our whole profession, if you read over the list of the world's five great extinctions, they all had very specific reasons and meanings, and everything from meteorites to earthquakes to oceans. I mean, it was endless, but the sixth extinction, which is going on right now, the cause, almost universally in the scientific community, is human intervention. In other words, we set up a system, we set an all-over global way of living and thinking and pretty much everything that in itself is not sustainable. Whereas all the other paradigms of history, whatever they are, whether they're hunter-gatherers or agriculture or industrialization or whatever, have always had this kind of parallel exchange with nature. They never really took nature totally for granted and assumed that it was an infinite resource, which it's not. And, you know, as most of the extinctions took 300 or 400 million years to evolve, and they say that since the Earth has been changed by human intervention more in the last, I think, 200 or 300 years than the last 300,000 years, you can see this acceleration process. So I would say in the big umbrella picture, I mean, we have this mega problem. What I call is thinking smaller, really. That's pretty much a bit. But back to AI, I think that AI could make enormous contributions to figuring out what are the chances. I mean, it deals with masses of information that no one brain or anything could possibly assemble and sort out. So to me, if I were skilled, I would use it for constant questioning. I would use it as a question in itself. I mean, you mentioned Nam June Paik. The genius of Nam June Paik, and he lived right around the corner from me, so we knew each other quite well, was that while that time new technology was video art, every video artist was using the screen and the images and whatever themselves as the art. So it was that great craze where I guess every young woman artist had to take off her clothes, so you had to show yourself in the nude. That was shocking. That'll shock it to them. And so there was an awful lot, almost all the art was still based on abstract art or figurative art or some classic tradition of art as we knew it. Nam June Paik just said, well, why isn't the whole media, why isn't the whole idea of television itself a subject matter? And that why his work is so powerful, because he's removed from that idea of illustrating other movements or other kinds of art using the media. He's saying the media itself is the source of ideas. So I think that kind of thinking, as it becomes more prevalent in AI, I think will be much more powerful. I think it will have a much more productive effect than this idea of has this kind of additive quality now. It's probably not working, or won't work for a long time.
So I think that's a great segue. So Philip, being by far the youngest amongst us, taking off from what James said, and this sort of, we talked about the greatest fears of the future of architecture with AI. What is your greatest hope for the future engaging with this technology?
Who, me or
Philip?
Philip, yeah.
So I have to be the optimistic one. That's much harder, actually. So there's so many things to be concerned about with AI, and I thought, one thing that really concerns me, actually, is just looking at these images that we produced in the course of a conversation that came out in maybe 2 seconds. We asked for something very specific. We got it. And the fear that I have for architecture in the age of AI is just that at a certain point, this kind of imaging, which lacks a personality behind it, that lacks a sensibility, that lacks reason in a way that we would hope, becomes good enough, right? So that's to say that the proliferation, the kind of normalization of AI imaging, if it also means a kind of privation or, devaluing of drawings like this, the thinking mind, the thinking hand, beautifully rendered. It would be a tremendous loss, I think, and for architecture, that's a really bleak possibility. Now, on the note of optimism, I think the fact that the three of us, at least, find kind of things of interest in the margins of what ChatGPT and DALL-E feed us is itself kind of cause for optimism. It's to say that the outcome is not predetermined. And I think, James, your reflections on Namjoon Pike also suggest another optimistic or promising route for AI and art, which is questioning the medium itself. How does it work? How does it communicate? How is it somehow expressive through questioning?
Well, that's what I mean. What else could it mean? Why does it have to mean what kind of becomes systemic and constrictive? What else could it mean? And that's, I think, the greatest power of it. I mean, it's a tool. To me, it's just, if I were really competent in AI, I still think I would feel it was yet another tool. A great tool, a unique tool, and I guess dangerously it deals with the human brain. But think about it. No matter what it conceives of, somebody has to run the agriculture, somebody has to provide the food, somebody has to provide the handwork, somebody, so masses of humanity still have to provide the substructure, the ecological structure, whatever structure, to support it in the first place. So, you know, frankly, my comment for tonight is we've opened up a nice dialogue, and it is kind of insulated. I'm already working on new lectures on the subject and trying to figure it all out, but I hope the AI Center will have a really mega conference or some kind of symposium or something that really gives it a few days to go in depth and in all of the aspects, from all the levels of expertise, because there are many, many levels of expertise being at work here, and I hope they'll all be concluded.
I think that's a great invitation to the audience to contribute to this conversation
Great.
in any way they see
Thank you
appropriate.
so much for this whole series of explorations, brilliant explorations. James, Philip, Suzanne, maybe I'll go out on a limb, but I don't think this is a conversation that could be generated by AI in any real way. So thank you so much. We have a little bit of some questions. There's one right here.
Hello, James. It's been about 30 years since I've seen you. Laszlo? Yes.
Somebody has to, I have a hard time hearing, unfortunately.
Laszlo Kiss.
Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh.
How are you?
My heavens.
So I have a couple of thoughts. When DALL-E first, I got access early to DALL-E, and I asked it to give me an image. And I said, it's a wall with a box on it. One side is open, there's a bathroom, there's a toilet on it that empties into the field. And DALL-E would not produce that image because it was contradictory to logic. It gave me all sorts of abstract stuff.
Let Suzanne sit next to me because she knows how to speak in my ear. I'm sad. I'm so sorry.
Well, I'll let him finish the question, and then
Yeah,
I'll
okay.
say it again.
So that was my experience, and I'm like, the anti-logic. So then I come back to Daniel Kahneman says, garbage in, garbage out. And this is already happening because AI is infecting itself. So that's a real concern. And the third issue is, Enrico Fermi said, intuito formidabile. And I think what you brought, and what artists somehow bring, it's not the bad Chrysler building, but that intuito formidabile that comes when you see a mark. That mark is not then copied or regenerated, but it produces something that you haven't thought of. So that's where I'll leave it. So great to see you.
So I guess, Laszlo, did you, it wasn't really a question, it was a compliment and a statement about his experience. So he was basically talking about his own experience with DALL-E, one of these AI programs, and he was trying to, have fun with it and have a sense of humor with it and have it make some image of a toilet floating in the sky.
Yeah.
And it refused because it didn't have, as you say, it was linear thinking and it could only deal with the information it had and it couldn't invent. And then, of course, it's starting to invent and doing all kinds of nefarious things. But he's saying nothing like the kind of invention in the human mind that can happen from that mark, from that mark on the page like you make. So he's really complimenting you.
The starting from scratch element is the key to how far it can go. Because the starting from scratch, well, they say the theory of relativity is still the greatest mind breakthrough in human history because it deals with information that logic cannot explain. And when AI starts dealing with that, and obviously I'm, an environmental artist, and my whole interest in the arts has been, mind-oriented. I mean, I really believe in conceptual art and performance. I've always liked any form of art that was kind of flipped the conventions inside out and found new avenues, new possibilities. And the more the AI can do that, obviously even people like me are going to get sucked in, obviously. Even at my age, I may get sucked in, yes, because that possibility, that kind of flexibility, starting from scratch, and then rethinking what it actually is, those two factors are so very important.
Thank you. And
Any other questions?
Questions?
Hi. First off, thank you. That was, excuse me, fucking brilliant. That was amazing. I was struck, Mr. Wines, by your talking about the role of calligraphy and the pen in the creative and sort of generative process. And I'm interested if either of you or any of you are familiar with the pen plotter material, which is a sort of a printer-like device that actually produces images by physically manipulating a pen, and rather than using a DPI or a pixel grid, by creating lines on paper. And it's a computational device, but I'm curious about your thoughts on how technology can learn from the limitations that we have in the physical world, producing physical drawings or physical art, and can synthesize that into new technology and create, as with the pen plotter, essentially new mediums.
Okay, I will try to paraphrase. So he's talking specifically about a kind of older plotter, which I remember, a pen plotter, which actually had pens that would draw. It was fed information digitally, but it would really draw. And so he's basically asking, do you think that there are instances in which our own limitations at drawing or making things physically can inform technology, and technology can inform our own limitations, basically?
Well, the issue of the human brain, I mean, as Stephen Hawking observed, compared to AI as a technology, we're pretty crude and pretty slow and pretty cumbersome. But the reality is, at its most flexible, as I pointed out, there was a kind of Einstein reference, which he said is my gift of fantasy, not what I learned at school, is that the brain is capable, when it's put into real action, and AI, we may eventually do that, where it's capable of thinking the unthinkable. And that's the big point. How do you think the unthinkable? And that's,
I think the new generation of young people, at least at Pratt, I think the new generation of young people in architecture, such as at Pratt, are turning the clock back a little bit, and your work is such a wonderful example. For example, getting them off strictly their computers, and actually there's the early students are actually doing freehand drawing one semester. And it's just a tremendous accomplishment that all these kids are off their computer and actually taking pen or pencil in hand and for a very short time doing freehand drawing. And I think you're the big inspiration for that.
So he was basically saying, you know, you've taught at Pratt for many, many, many years, and after a big interest amongst the students in, you know, all kinds of parametric modeling and everything, he now finds younger students are inspired by you and are drawing again by hand, and it's thanks to you that they're doing so.
oh, thank you. Well, I must say, the one thing I'm most grateful for is to be in my 90s, and I would say 80% of the young people I speak to are in their 20s. So to be 90s and always talk to young people is extremely exhilarating and very promising. And really, first of all, gratitude for all of you for coming tonight and for your patience. But let's have a bigger discussion. Let's go on for longer next time. Let's really, you know, I don't know if I can drink these drinks, but I mean, it's great to celebrate the genius of our bartenders, but yeah, this is a pretty big subject as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for, oh, one more question? Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I want to thank James for coming out and giving us all the insights tonight.
Can you speak up a little?
Yep, I want to thank James for coming out tonight, giving us the insight, and then Suzanne and Philip for the conversation. My question is relating to AI as a tool, and throughout the discussion we've talked about tools leaving or rather the authors leaving a mark with the tool. I'm wondering what the author's fingerprint or the author's mark looks like in an AI-generated image, if there is one, or I guess in terms of the double Chrysler building, if the marks or the accidents are purely generated by the tool itself and not a product of the author or the author's manipulation of the tool.
Okay, I'm going to repeat that so James hears it, but I'd like you to answer that question, Philip. Okay, so he's basically asking, what does the thumbprint, the unique thumbprint, look like in AI?
There just isn't one, right? I mean, we know, again, I've pointed out these images a handful of times already, but it's input, output. There's a black box in the middle that spits something out based on what you're asking, and yeah, there's no thumbprint because there's no personality behind it. There's no thinking hand, thinking mind. There's no kind of swerve or expression of a will that doesn't necessarily follow reason, but maybe is learning something, the process of working and drawing out. By contrast to the drawing on the right, James, you and I have talked about that one so much. It's actually how we were first introduced when you were working on this drawing. You can imagine that AI could never produce a view like this because an AI produces an image all at once. Whereas, as you explained to me, you start with a vague idea that gets worked out incrementally, responsively, in real time as you're working with your tools.
Did you hear what Philip said?
Yeah, sort of.
Okay. Basically, he said, you know, there can be no fingerprint in an AI-generated image because it's done all at once. Whereas when you and Philip met, you were working on this drawing, and you were discussing the iterative process, that you start with an idea, but maybe by the time you're partway through the drawing, it begins to evolve and change. And so
Yeah.
it's constantly transformative and a constant engagement and a dialogue back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, the creative process, I mean, if we get it, I just say that's why we have this big conference on the whole subject, because when you talk about the creative process, it is mystical no matter what. And nobody can really understand it or where it comes from. And, you know, I often quote a really great expert on Shakespeare who was giving an amazing lecture on Shakespeare's work. And, you know, trying to explain it. And he started off, he said, the only way you could write Shakespeare is easily, because you could never know that much about the human condition by studying in school. And that's so true. And all inspiration is expanding your sensibility, expanding the options. And the criticism that you do as an artist is you expand the options. I would say sometimes I look back through drawings I did 20, 30 years ago, and I said, oh, shit. I said, that was really good. Why didn't I recognize I really had a good idea at the time? I missed it totally. On the other hand, I found another drawing and said, oh my God, what was I thinking that day? So that critical process is there. I mean, it is. And it probably is not highly refined in AI, at least yet. So.
I would like to observe, that the Ramapo Fault, which was obviously a fan of yours, along with so many of us this morning, made a small seismic event in honor of your coming here this evening.
The earthquake was in honor of your coming here.
Yeah, it was very funny because somebody woke me up in the morning. I have some crazy friends. And they woke me up and said, oh, you're in the middle of an earthquake. And I thought I should get out of bed. And I fully expected to hear buildings collapsing around me. And she gave me this apocalyptic thing.
Well, it made me think of some of
I
your
know
early
you're
designs.
Speaking to the AIA tonight, no one will show up tonight because of that scare.
It was all in your honor.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for having the courage.
Well, thank you all, and we would wholeheartedly love to extend this conversation, but we do have a hard stop at about this hour. Thank you so much, James, Suzanne, and Philip, for this wonderful conversation, and thank you all for coming. And we hope to see you again on May 17th with Jonathan Marvel, and thank you, American Metalcraft, for your sponsorship. We very much appreciate it. Thank you, and good night.